A Woodlawn church community is devastated over the loss of one of their own. Members say they have no idea why anyone would want to take the life of a woman who always poured into others. Kiara Jenkins is described by those who knew her as a loving person who made others feel supported. The 36-year-old mother of 5 was devoted to her children and to her church.
It's a tragic situation. She just seemed like a nice lady. She spoke, every time she saw us. And, she was just coming and going, I guess going to work or whatever.
Adam says the neighborhood was quiet in the morning when he left for church, but when he returned home in the afternoon, there was a heavy police presence. At this point, police do not have a suspect or a motive in this case.
It was just chaos. They had everything wrapped up in tape and everywhere, front and back.
It was 4:30 in the morning on a quiet Sunday in January, and the alley behind South Drexel Avenue should have been empty. But instead, neighbors would wake up to yellow crime scene tape, flashing lights, and a tragedy that would shatter an entire community. 36-year-old Kiara Jenkins, a mother of 5 and a woman known for her unwavering faith, was found in that alley with multiple injuries that ended her life. She was dressed for church, heading to the 5 a.m. service she attended every single week. She never made it. If you're already feeling that gut punch and want to dive deeper into stories like this that demand justice and remembrance, hit that like button right now, subscribe to She's Alive, and smash that bell icon. Seriously, because missing out means these cases stay in the shadows longer than they should, and these victims deserve our attention. Let's make sure Kiara's story is heard. So let's talk about who Kiara Jenkins really was, because understanding her life makes what happened even more heartbreaking. Kiara was 36 years old, living in the Woodlawn neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, an area with deep roots and tight-knit communities, but also its share of challenges. She had 5 children ranging from a freshman in college all the way down to a 10-year-old. Can you even imagine trying to raise 5 kids, making sure the oldest is settling into college life while still helping the youngest with homework? That was Kiara's everyday reality, and by all accounts, she did it with grace and love. Everyone who knew her described her the same way. She was warm, welcoming, always ready to help. Her neighbor Michael Adams, who had only recently moved a couple of doors down from her, said he didn't even know her name at first, but she always spoke to him. Every single time. Whether she was heading to work or just passing by, she made people feel seen. That's rare, right? In a world where most of us are glued to our phones, rushing past each other, Kiara took the time to acknowledge people. Her church family at Mt. Bethlehem Missionary Baptist Church in Woodlawn said the same thing. She poured into others, they said. She was devoted not just to her faith, but to making sure the people around her felt supported and loved. Faith wasn't just a Sunday thing for Kiara. It was her foundation. She attended the 5 a.m. service every week, and we're talking 5 in the morning, people. Most of us are still asleep at that hour, but Kiara was up, dressed, and ready to worship. That level of dedication tells you everything you need to know about her priorities. Her children, her faith, her community. Those were the pillars of her life. January 19th, 2026, started like any other Sunday for Kiara. It was still dark outside, the kind of cold Chicago morning where your breath fogs in the air. She was preparing to walk to Mt. Bethlehem Missionary Baptist Church, just like she always did. Her home was on the same block as that alley on South Drexel Avenue, in the 6400 block. It should have been a short, familiar walk. She had done it countless times before. But this time, something went horribly, unimaginably wrong. Around 4:30 a.m., Kiara was found in the alley behind her home, near 64th and Drexel. She had sustained multiple injuries and was pronounced gone at the scene. The woman who was supposed to be leading worship in just 30 minutes was instead lying in an alley, her life stolen in the most senseless way. What could possibly drive someone to harm a woman on her way to church? Stick with me, because the details of what investigators found next will leave you stunned. So here's where this gets even more devastating, and I need you to really think about this for a second. Kiara wasn't just going to any service. She was heading to a 5 a.m. worship, which means she was part of that core group of believers who show up before the sun rises, before most people even think about rolling out of bed. These are the people who keep the lights on in their communities, literally and figuratively. And someone took that away from her family, from her church, from her 5 kids. Let that sink in for a moment. When Michael Adams came home that afternoon after attending his own church service that morning, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The entire block was wrapped in tape, front and back. Police cruisers everywhere, officers moving in and out of the alley, investigators combing through every inch of the scene. He had left that morning and everything seemed normal. By the time he got back, his neighbor, that friendly woman who always said hello, was gone. He told reporters it was tragic, and you could hear the disbelief in his voice. This was someone he had just seen recently, someone who seemed so full of life. Now think about her oldest child for a second. This is a freshman in college, probably just starting to figure out life away from home, dealing with classes and new experiences, and then gets the call that changes everything. That child had to become the spokesperson for the family, had to talk to the media while processing the most traumatic loss imaginable. They told ABC7 that the family was trying to be there for each other, trying to process what happened. What do you even say in that situation? How do you explain to a 10-year-old that mom isn't coming home? How do you comfort your siblings when you're barely holding it together yourself? Word spread slowly through the Woodlawn community that Sunday. It wasn't one of those instant social media frenzies. It was neighbor telling neighbor, church member calling church member, that slow, painful realization rippling through people who knew and loved Kiara. The folks at MT Bethlehem Missionary Baptist Church were absolutely devastated. They kept asking the same question over and over. Why would someone take the life of a woman who always poured into others? What possible reason could there be? And here's the thing that makes this even more chilling. Kiara was attacked right behind her own home. This wasn't some random location across town. This was her neighborhood, her block, the alley she probably walked through regularly. The place where she should have felt safest. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Did she know the person? Was she targeted specifically, or was she just in the wrong place at the worst possible time? These are the questions that haunt investigators and families alike. The Chicago Police Department arrived on scene and immediately began their work. Area 1 detectives took over the case, and they faced a puzzle with very few pieces. There were no immediate witnesses coming forward. No obvious suspects. No clear motive. Just a woman who had been going to church and never made it. The detectives started doing what they always do, canvassing the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking if anyone saw or heard anything unusual in those early morning hours. But 4:30 a.m. on a Sunday? Most people are sound asleep. The chances of finding someone who happened to be awake and looking out their window at exactly the right moment were pretty slim. Police didn't release much information to the public initially, which is pretty standard in active investigations, but it also left the community desperate for answers. They wanted to know if there was danger still lurking in their neighborhood. They wanted to know if this was random or targeted. What would you do if this happened on your block and police weren't giving you any information? What would you do if this happened on your block and police weren't giving you any information? Would you feel safe leaving your house in the early morning hours? Let me walk you through what investigators were dealing with here, because this case presented some serious challenges from the very beginning. When Area 1 detectives started piecing together the timeline, they had a window of maybe 30 minutes, possibly less, between when Kiara left her home and when she was discovered. That's an incredibly narrow time frame, and in a residential area at that hour, finding witnesses becomes nearly impossible. The detectives began by documenting every piece of evidence at the scene, photographing the alley, collecting anything that might tell them what happened in those crucial minutes. But here's what really frustrated investigators. Despite their efforts, despite canvassing the entire neighborhood, despite interviewing everyone they could find, they came up empty. No security cameras caught anything useful. No neighbors reported hearing disturbances. No physical evidence pointed them toward a clear suspect. And as days turned into a week, the trail went cold. Now you might be thinking, how does this happen in 2026 with all our technology and investigative resources? Well, the reality is that crimes committed in the early morning hours in residential areas with no witnesses are some of the hardest to crack. Without that initial break, that first solid lead, detectives are basically starting from zero. The medical examiner confirmed Kiara died from her injuries at the scene, and while I'm keeping this appropriate for all viewers, what's important to understand is that this was clearly intentional. Someone made a choice that morning. Someone decided to end a mother's life while she was on her way to worship. The brutality of that decision is what haunts everyone connected to this case. As of right now, January 20th, 2026, literally just 2 days after this happened, there have been no arrests. Chicago police have been transparent about one thing. They don't have a suspect, and they don't have a clear motive. Think about how terrifying that is for the Woodlawn community. They're living with the knowledge that whoever did this is still out there, possibly walking the same streets, shopping at the same stores. The police have asked anyone with information to submit anonymous tips at cpdtip.com. But so far, nothing has broken this case wide open. And here's something that struck me while researching this. There hasn't been a vigil announced yet. No community rally. No public fundraiser for those 5 children who just lost their mother. Now that could change tomorrow, next week, whenever the family feels ready, but the silence is noticeable. Sometimes communities come together immediately with marches and memorials, but other times grief is too fresh, too raw, and people need time to process before they can organize. Kiara's family is still in that initial shock phase, still trying to figure out how to move forward. One detail that absolutely breaks my heart is the timing. Kiara would have celebrated her 37th birthday this coming Sunday, January 26th. Instead of planning a birthday celebration, her children are planning a funeral. Instead of getting cards and calls from loved ones, they're getting condolences. The cruelty of that timing is almost unbearable to think about. So where does this leave us? We have a devoted mother, a faithful church member, a woman everyone described as kind and helpful, taken from her family in the most violent way imaginable. We have 5 children without their mother. We have a church community without one of their most dedicated members. We have a neighborhood living in fear. And we have no answers, no justice, no closure. The investigation remains active and ongoing, but every day that passes without a breakthrough makes solving this case harder. Here's what I want you to think about. What makes someone capable of taking a life so callously? How does a community heal when the person responsible is still out there? And if you lived on that block, how would you feel sending your own family members out the door in the early morning darkness? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely want to hear how you'd process something like this. And please, if this story moved you, share this video. Share it on your social media. Send it to people who care about justice, because the more eyes on Kiara's case, the better chance someone out there knows something that could help investigators. Subscribe to She's Alive if you haven't already. Hit that bell so you never miss when we cover cases that need attention, and check out our other videos where we dig deep into stories that deserve to be told. Kiara Jenkins mattered. Her life mattered. Her children deserve answers. Let's make sure her story doesn't fade into the background. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.